Welcome everyone to the Francis Fogel Story Strategist podcast. It's lovely to have those of you that have listened before back again in the audience. And if you haven't listened, you're in for a complete treat today. We all know that in the good world and ethical world, or in the world of good ethical marketing, size isn't everything. But our guest today has got a hefty 60,000 odd followers on Instagram alone. Which is where I tend to hang out and where I tend to sort of check in to see how he's doing. And so I don't think we'll need much introduction, but for anybody, there was a time when I didn't know who you were, Alastair. So for those people that might not either, my guest today is the amazing Alastair Humphreys. He calls himself an adventurer, and when he started calling himself an adventurer, people from what I've read, from what you've written, it's almost as if people started responding differently to you as a human being, as if when we put a stamp or a label on ourselves, people suddenly sort of, that's your formal introduction. So Alastair Humphreys is an adventurer. And for anyone who's really keen watching this on YouTube and has seen an episode before, you might notice these 3 books here on my left behind me, and they are 3 of the books that Alastair has written about adventuring. I came across Alastair in a wonderful little independent bookshop myself. I bought local and started reading it in January, which was very fortuitous. We'll get into that in a minute as to why. And then bought the other book, Microadventures, and one of Alastair's children's books from Alastair directly. And we'll talk about those in a minute. And I just completely fell for Alastair's raison d'etre, not least because I identified myself very much with it. So without any further ado, Alastair, thank you for being here. How are you today? Where are you today, Alastair?
I'm very well, thank you for having me. I am in my shed, which is where I work / write books / faff around and drink lots of tea. Combinations of all 3 above. Which independent bookshop did you buy local from? Because I love independent bookshops. I'm always browsing in them and rarely seem to find my own book. So I'm excited you found one who's got my book, and give them a shout out.
Yeah, I think I did, unless I'm going mad. I can't think of any other reason why I would know about you other than if I found you in a bookshop. And I do believe I bought your book in a bookshop called Book Bar in Hackney.
Book Bar
Not
in
in Hackney, sorry, it's in Black something, what's it called? Not Blackstock Road. Is it Blackstock Road? In not far from Finsbury Park. And I don't know where you live, somewhere in London or around London. I'm not sure if you actually ever name it in the book local.
No,
or
I
not.
don't name anywhere in either local or Microadventures. Partly it's just a sort of internet privacy thing, but mostly it's because I really want my adventure books to be sparks of ideas, not recipe books. In other words, so Microadventures, that book you've got on the top, is loads of different adventures that I went and did, and hopefully other people will go and do. And what I really didn't want people to think is, oh, I can't go and do X adventure because I live 150 miles from this hill he mentions. And what I want people to think is, oh, I like the adventure he did. There's a hill near my house. Let's combine the 2. So yeah, I don't tend to mention place names in my books.
Yeah, and we could, I mean, already we could go down a few rabbit holes from here. There's the books themselves. So you've mentioned Microadventures and local. I wonder if you can describe to everybody can I try? I feel like such a
Of
teacher's
course.
pet. Okay,
Yeah,
so
go for it. I like a podcast where I can just sit and drink my
no,
cup of
that's
tea.
so not the point, but I'm going to try and do them justice, because hopefully my passion will come across, and it's not just you then standing on a soapbox telling everyone about,
Saying
because one
how
of the things I
amazing
want,
I am.
yeah, and what I can't understand, and you said this to me in an email once, was something about books not being in a bookshop, which I couldn't understand. I mean, you are so famous and fabulous and have such prolific writing habits. I don't quite understand why your book, that's strange, and that's a curiosity I want to get into in this podcast, if you don't mind. But
Failure. We can.
Well, okay, maybe we'll talk about that then in a minute. So micro adventures came before local, didn't it?
Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah, so Microadventures, everyone, is a wonderful collection of short, sort of inspirational 2-page suggestions. There's 40 of them, I think, or so, 38 in the book, as to what you might do in your local area. It's very much flavoured from the perspective of being near, in or around London, just because that's where Alastair is, which was great because that's where I am. But as Alastair says, you can do these things anywhere and they're quite amazing. And so just to give you an example, one adventure is just to simply hang out in an area where you already are very familiar, but do it at night. And it's all kinds of things like that. It's, you know, and I love at the beginning of the book, Alastair, you say that everybody says to you, well, one day I'm going to go on an adventure. And so one of your adventures is the one day adventurers. Just take one day and go on an adventure. So that's micro adventures. And local is Alistair's latest book. So definitely do go out and get that. I am holding myself back from finishing it because I've got to April and I've decided
Oh,
that for the
nice.
rest of the year, I'm going to treat myself to a chapter because the book takes you through the year. And Alistair has, it's such a brilliant idea, taken an ordnance survey map of his local area. And each week, is that right? You take a square from the ordnance survey map and you explore it by foot or bike. And so it's wonderful because if you do go through it through the year, so for those of you buying it now, you have the pleasure of getting up to April or wherever you are in the year when you listen to this, and then you can pace yourself as I am if you like. You have the pleasure of reading what Alistair does and what Alistair sees in Britain at the time that you're reading this, which I think is a really lovely way to get through the book. I don't know if other people are doing that, Alistair. And
Yeah,
the
that might
third
be a
one is
nice way of doing it.
yeah, it is a nice way of doing it. The third one is The Boy Who Biked the World, which is a series that Alistair wrote for kids. So I'm nearly at the end of that first one with my son, Ira, who's enjoying it very much.
Oh, good.
So which was the nicest to write, would you say,
Oh, gosh, that's a good question.
out of all of the
Nicest to write.
books? And how many have you got?
I've written 16 books, but these three you have there are a good case study for most things we probably need to talk about. So you can stick to those. The nicest, I would say, was probably local, just in terms of nice to write, because the book is just full of random, totally random facts about stuff that I learnt during my year exploring my local map. And it's quite a thick book. I actually think it's too thick, and I tried to make it a bit thinner, but the original draft was more than twice as long. So I just found out so much stuff. And it's a book really about just being curious and how when you decide to become interested in something, it becomes interesting. And if you go out with the attitude that everything I see today will be interesting, then it becomes so. And so I just became fascinated by all sorts of totally random things I knew absolutely nothing about. And so it's quite a joy to do the initial brain dump of the writing all of that. It was quite painful to then try and cull it down to something coherent and sensible, but it was quite an enjoyable writing process. I generally find writing books to be extremely painful and enjoyable. I like editing books and I like having written books, but I find the actual sitting down to write them quite torturous.
And I suppose people are going on a bit of an adventure listening to this because we haven't really gone in chronological order at all. But what I
No.
will ask you is to tell us how this all kind of started. And what I will invite you to do, I don't know how often you're asked to do this on the podcast, is to kind of go as deep as you feel comfortable with in terms of trying to analyze the why and why you evolved as somebody and at what age, if you have any ages that you think are seminal in the story, you became who you are.
um, so I think the relevant ages and actions probably begin with me at university getting really into reading travel and adventure books rather than actually paying any attention to my degree and being really excited about the prospect of hitting the road and exploring. And so when I finished uni, I was 24. I cycled around the world for 4 years. For all the reasons that young people like to go on big adventures. And I sort of assumed that at the end of that, I'd have got it all out of my system and then I'd get on with a proper job. But what surprised me was that by going the whole way around the world was not how much I'd seen, but how little of the world I'd seen. And that got me then hungry for more. So I spent quite a few years then chasing big adventures, rowing oceans and crossing deserts and all that sort of big adventure stuff. And then I had quite a pivot about 10 years ago or so when I decided to move from just the big, brilliant adventures, which was fantastic to me, towards what I came to call microadventures, which was trying to get all the stuff that all of us love about adventure, but packaging it in a way that was compatible with busy real lives. So trying to fit things around the margins of our working days, essentially. And then I've been doing microadventures for quite a lot of years, and then I've gone even smaller now, realizing that although microadventures are pretty small, they still are dependent upon you being able to get out of town to go to find a hill or a river or something like that. And so local was my attempt to go even smaller and to try and be more inclusive in encouraging everyone to find nearby nature and wildness, and to try and challenge people to say there is more wildness than you probably realize if you just look around with a bit more observation and curiosity. So my adventures have gone from huge, cycling around the world, to extremely tiny, rummaging around the car park around the back of Sainsbury's to look for some rewilding patches of brambles.
Okay, so let's talk about rewilding. Before we go any further, my curiosity is getting the better of me, Alistair. I can see that says nature is not for everyone. Is that, or is for everyone? What does that say and
Yes,
what
on
is
my
it?
Zoom thing. This is a poster I had up in a recent Zoom thing. It's from the Right to Roam campaign. Which is trying to get more access for more people into nature. And they had a campaign recently running in the body shop around the UK. And at the end of the campaign, I went to my local body shop. I'm a regular shopper at a body shop. And got their merchandise stash. So it's a big giant poster. Really cool. Oh, cool cutout thing. This is quite cool. I don't really know what to do with it.
Love
It's
it.
quite nice. And yeah, nature's for everyone. So one of the big
By the
things
way, for
that's
anyone who's listening to this on the podcast, because obviously this is good
yes,
audio practice, I should explain that we've just had the pleasure of seeing Alistair rummaging around in his shed to get more things that look like
a big
wood.
cardboard
They're kind of
cutout.
woodcut prints on cardboard. So
Mm.
they've of a couple of people sort of walking around, and a nice woodcut
Yeah.
poster, massive poster saying nature is for everyone. And then what does it say again?
And it
Sorry.
says come trespass with us. So they're trying to encourage the notion of acting as though you own the land. So trying to be more out trespassing, communicating with people, trying to get more people connected with nature, and therefore to care for it more. That sort of thing. It's a guy. One of the organizers, a guy called Nick Hayes, who's wrote a really good book called The Trespasser's Companion, which I really like, and he does that beautiful woodcut artwork.
Okay, cool. So by the way, I've changed my mind. I realise now that I actually bought your book in Waterstones in Hampstead.
Okay.
I remember that's where
Okay, excellent. Thank you to Waterstones.
So
Whenever I find my book in Waterstones, I always tactically position it in a really good place near the front door. So maybe I'd put it somewhere you could see it.
oh, why have you been to Hampstead recently and done that?
I haven't actually. I
Well,
may
there you
have
go.
that.
It was in a prominent position and you
Oh,
didn't even
good.
have to go in and do that. But the reason I was there was I was buying up anything I could find. It was my birthday present to myself. So it was January, hence I bought it and started it in an appropriate, timely fashion in January.
And just when it was published this
Right.
January.
And that's probably why it was ta-da. Waterstones has done their job really well and put what has just been published on and Waterstones in most places is amazing in itself. It's an accessible chain of bookshops that, if you're not somebody who likes to noodle around independent shops, is a good point of entry, if you like, to the amazing world of bookshops and looking around them. And the one in Hampstead, which is one of the two nearest to me, is stunning, and it has just everything so beautifully organized. And upstairs is the kind of travel and adventures section. But there's also an entire shelf dedicated to sort of Britain, and not just, and I have to take pains to make sure people understand clearly that I'm not a Brexiteer and I'm not into Britain because I'm trying to get us out of any other possible way of being in community with the world that is possible. In fact, on the contrary, you know, I've kind of fallen in love with Britain in my 40s for a number of reasons, but rewilding is something that is now a massive passion for me too. And I was looking for books on glamping and rewilding and the coastline, because all of my my ideal clients are based in London and the southeast. So I was buying a few random bits and bobs, including one book about a woman who cycled around Britain. Ran around Britain without having done much running at all. You probably know
Elise
her name.
Downing.
Yeah, Louise Downing. And
Ate a lot of ice cream.
yeah, it was such a sweet book. And I read that just before I started yours.
Have you read Wilding? It's my
I
favourite
have,
of the rewilding books.
of
And
course.
Wild Fell by Lee Schofield. It's
No,
fantastic.
that I have not read. So I'm going to put that
Feral by George Monbiot. That's a bit less of this sort of bucolic, beautiful nature writing, but that was really pivotal for me in opening my eyes to realizing that our green and pleasant land, which I really love, is not actually that nice. It's basically a desert, a green desert. So Feral was quite a pivotal book for me.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, that is something I'm talking about a lot in my work, that, you know, we come from this understanding of what we have been taught is the pastoral idyll of Britain, just because we're so used to very tidy fields with clipped hedges. And so we understand that to be beautiful. And our concept of beauty has changed so much in keeping up with this obsession post-war, as Isabella Tree says in her book, of digging for Britain, which meant that farmland across the country was just wildlife was ripped up in favor of arable land. And just looping back to your book, Local, what's amazing, as you say, is that you take pains to trespass through these crazy places that nobody would consider spending any time with at all, like a bypass next to a motorway, and you know, filled with rubbish and pollution and all sorts, and find the most wonderful things. And it's very moving. But sorry, I just realized we massively digressed from me asking you about your childhood. Would you go back and you've told the story a number of times that I've heard about, was it biology you studied at university?
Yes,
Geography.
zoology.
Was there, so the story you're telling, and you have told a number of times, is the whole, I fell in love with adventuring, and it was kind of by accident because I was supposed to be studying zoology, and then and I think there's a story you tell about one of your teachers not being tricked into thinking you should go away somewhere. Is that right? And then they told you to focus on, I think it's in Local. You say that your university lecturer, you sort of tried to come up with an excuse to go abroad, but then had to stick around and finish something academically before you went off after university. Or have I just made that up about you?
It doesn't ring any bells.
Oh, okay. I'll try and dig it out in your book and send it to you.
My memory is terrible. Who knows what I've written?
Well, it was a good story, even if it wasn't true.
Okay.
But then, yeah, you escape after university, and but can you sort of maybe touch on psychologically what might have been happening for you, and maybe speak to where you are now? And you live in suburbia now, don't you? And
Yes, I think the psychology of me craving big adventures, I think, probably goes back a bit to more of when I was a kid and at school and a teenager, and I just felt really average as a younger person, really sort of forgettable sort of person. I wasn't very good at anything. I wasn't really rubbish at anything. I wasn't really good at anything. I was just so average. And I think I probably just really wanted some chance to just do something a bit wow and a bit extraordinary. And if you can't get picked for the school football team, then go cycle around the world instead. That sort of slight chip on my shoulder, I think, of just wanting to prove myself to myself, and I guess prove myself to the world. So I was definitely, in my early days of adventure, I was really striving to do something really tough, to do something tougher than you could do, and to therefore mark myself out. So it felt quite a sort of competitive, fairly old-fashioned chasing of what being a man felt like to me at the time as a young guy all those years ago. So it's definitely sort of pushed by that notion of trying to prove myself and sort of feel I had something to remark on, something remarkable, I guess. So, and that's quite good fuel for the fire to think, I'll show you and head out into the world. But you can only keep up that sort of extrinsic motivation for so long. So I remember thinking as I cycled through Europe and through Africa, quite a bit of that was motivated by slightly negative thoughts of I'll prove myself to all these doubters people. But after about a year or so, then I was more interested. I guess I got that out of my system, and then I became more interested in trying to prove to myself what I was capable of. Once you start doing difficult things, you start to grow and develop, and that gives you confidence and momentum to think, wow, I've done that thing that surprised me. I wonder what else can I do? So I was quite interested in sort of pushing my own mental and physical limits and exploring that side of things. But again, eventually, I suppose after a while, that sort of competing against myself aspect gets quite tiring and full. And then eventually, I was just so maybe the final year and a half of cycling around the world was just because, well, this is an interesting thing to do. I can learn about the world out here. So yeah, evolving emotions and motivations, I think.
This is a really beautiful way of meandering in this conversation, and it's what's making me think is that this conversation is a bit of a microcosm of the psychological condition that I think a lot of people might go through, you and I included, which is to say that you start off and it's all over the place a bit, like this conversation. And then as you get to, but you're in a place of privilege, let's just name it, as getting sort of back away from the metaphor and into the literal, what we're talking about here. I'll speak for myself, and you can let me know if there's any points of reference. I went to a really nice local state school, and then I went to a girls' secondary school in inner city London. And I had a really enjoyable time there in the main. It was quite diverse because it was in a city. It wasn't denominational religiously, but it was a private school. They did have a lot of assisted places, and it was supported by a number of kind of city guilds and stuff. But essentially, it was a private girls' school. But it was made up of so many people who came in from outside London into London that it felt not too twatty, although it was a bit twatty. And the twattiness meant that we were told we could kind of do whatever the boys could do. And this was in the sort of early 90s, excuse me. And nobody this is another conversation for another day, but nobody told us at the time as women that we had wombs and vaginas and that we might be a bit screwed when it came to actually having a career, but that's a whole other thing. We were given this sense that it's not only a case of you should aspire to be anything that the boys are. This was like, right in the middle of feminism, but also you're nobody if you don't, right? And they used to wheel out people from MI6 to come and talk in assembly, MI5, MI6, and other kind of government organizations and people at the top of jobs. And I remember when there was a famous FT article around that time, focusing on a woman who had it all because she ran Bank of New York Mellon. She had, I think, 9 children, and she was managing to rock it. And there was no focus on women who just were like me, who had 2 kids and did some work full time. You had to be everything. And that was the kind of environment that I grew up in as well. And if you were not going to Oxbridge, you just fell off the radar at a certain point. So when it came to 6th form, nobody really gave a shit what I was doing anymore, because I wasn't being groomed for Oxbridge. I wasn't going to hit those numbers for the school. And that was great, because I was just left alone to go and do whatever I wanted to do, get stoned under the bushes before going into art. And I did fine. But I'm wondering if you might have a similar experience in that, your education and your family were so supportive, almost so sort of giving you a sense that you could do everything, that you know, I can very much identify with this sense of, but I'm just a jack of all trades almost, you know. I used to call myself a rainbow person because I was a little bit good at a lot of things as opposed to a master of anything. And when you were talking about having a bit of an itch to scratch, about needing to achieve something almost, I can very much identify with that. And I'm just wondering if it comes from this being in the top, being at the, you know, I don't know if you were, but I was certainly at the bottom of the top 5%, if you see what I mean.
Right.
Because you're very articulate and articulate. Um, yeah, can you say anything about any of that?
Yeah, I don't feel that I was in some sort of hothouse of growing up. I think probably wherever kids are rich, poor, anything like that, there's the sort of top dogs in a bit of in a society, and then the sort of riffraff in the middle. And so I don't really think it was that. Certainly, though, later on, once I started then to say get back from the bike trip, and I started trying to build a career out of adventuring and writing and speaking, I did then get this sort of ridiculous sense of I must be uber ambitious and push, 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 push. Which I think is at some point the road to a little bit of madness. So in recent years, my ambition is to become less ambitious, which has been a whole separate sort of education. Um, but yeah, certainly I feel very privileged to have been able to scratch my itches by getting on a bike and cycling around the world. There's not many people for whom that's an option on the planet. So I was definitely very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, and on that, I think, you know, the people I love to work with are people who also do have a tiny bit of luxury of time, luxury of headspace, and maybe did, for whatever reason, have a sense that they wanted to kind of die feeling like they'd achieved something going on. And so the people I like to work with are maybe founders or custodians, as I call them, of farms that need to pivot their income or diversify their income streams. Maybe their grandparents bought the farm and worked really hard and aren't around anymore, and the people who are looking after them now realize they need to shift gear a little bit in accordance to what we were talking about earlier, and rewild or get glamping sites up there, and be a bit more inclusive in the community. Or they might be pubs with a wonderful story who are not doing enough with them, with those stories, to kind of keep their people and customers happy and to do more in society. But maybe there are also people, I think, just to kind of niche down, if you like, and use marketing terminology. It's those people that are in a position that actually can do something because they've got the itch scratchy thing going on. They want to die feeling like they've done something going on. They care about the environment. They care about their people, because there's many of these projects around, aren't there? You know, the landscape is changing literally and physically and metaphorically. But there's some amazing people doing some incredible things out there and having to really shift gear in accordance with an awareness of net zero and climate change. And it seems to me that you've gone from being somebody like I was, who backpacked for 13 months on her own and just had a really nice jolly for oneself and one's own self-development reasons, into somebody who is incredibly inspirational to me, because similarly, I am uncomfortable about getting on a flight to go backpacking anymore. I can't anyway because I've got kids. So I think you're in a similar situation. Can't just bugger off. Maybe you can. But I'm really keen to kind of adventure locally. And so your work has really moved me and changed me, I would say, because it's given me a sense of not feeling alone, feeling that I'm somebody who can be an adventurer and also have to pay the bills, stay local, be climate aware. I just wonder how much you realize that your work is now shifting into this sort of position of influence for people like us who can actually do something to change the world.
Yeah, it's a definite conscious changing, which I suspect just comes from growing up a bit, I guess. And there's different phases in life, and also the evolving um, world take on the climate and the planet and the environment. When I started adventuring, so when I cycle around the world, I set off in 2001. spent 4 years out on my bike, just traveling across continents by bicycle, crossing oceans by boat. And that's an amazingly green, eco, environmentally friendly expedition. But not once in those 4 years did that ever cross my mind. And in all the interviews that I did around the time about the adventure I was having, not once did anyone ever comment on it being a green and eco type thing. So find that really interesting in terms of how much the conversation has developed the last 20 years. If I was about to cycle around the world now, I would be probably banging on about an amazingly green, woke, fantastic person that I was by doing that. So that's very much a change in that. Plus, then I've changed as I get older, I suppose. And I think what I'm really hoping from this local type thing is to give the is to help people realize that you're not doing a worse thing. So you say you'd love to go backpacking, but you can't because of flying, children, etc. And so you're exploring locally. And what I hope you'll find from your local adventures is that you're not having a worse time. You're not missing out. You're not wearing a martyrdom hair shirt for the sake of keeping Greta Thunberg happy. You're actually having a really interesting, really worthwhile, fulfilling, enriching experience. And I want to try and do the right thing for the planet, like I guess most of us do, but equally, I'm a fairly lazy and selfish person. And if it's a pain and a hassle and boring and uncomfortable, then my goodwill will quickly dwindle away. So in things like evolving the food that I eat, the only way I could do that is by learning to cook really nice alternatives to juicy cheeseburgers. And wandering around my local map, I could do it for maybe a month or two to save the world. But if I can do it for a whole year, then I need to be finding this challenging and rewarding and enlightening and expanding too. So I think that was something that was a very welcome discovery in this whole project. Was, wow, this is actually quite a cool thing to do. It's not a rubbish thing to do. I'm only close to home, but it's actually really interesting. And I think if you're going to try and bring about any sorts of change, it needs to be by getting people to do it voluntarily and through improving their life, not just hammering them around the head with a mallet.
Completely. And my version of that story, which is completely true and not just a story, is that I have not been able to take a flight for 6 years, as I've mentioned on this podcast a number of times, because I have a child with multiple severe life-threatening allergies who was born just before lockdown. And so not least because of COVID, we couldn't travel, but it was too stressful to think about taking Razzie anywhere. It wasn't so much that the allergies are necessary, like definitely airborne. It wasn't necessarily just the flights that were putting us off. It was then being somewhere, and my husband and I tend to like to just mooch around in markets and pick things up and eat them. And the idea of having to restrain ourselves so much because we were going to have to self-cater, and we don't like the idea of those big, horrible corporate white sort of 3 million buffet restaurant hotels with 4,000 people in them, and we just couldn't bear it, and we didn't have the money. So for those reasons, we have not taken flights on holiday for 6 years, and no other reason. So I'm very clear to make people aware that it's not because I'm some sort of virtuous Greta Thunberg myself. We just happen to have not done that, and the result of it was that I had to, because you and I are similar, create adventures at home. And so I got completely obsessed with glamping and cabins. And so just fell in love with canopy and stars. And now at least once a month, I would say, I'm dragging my husband and children off to some random cabin somewhere that's no more than an hour away from London. And that's mainly, again, because I can't be asked to sit in a car with children for more than an hour. But also it does mean that we can get the train there and they're not going insane. And that's how my my second business evolved, because I then just became very, very interested in what people were doing with these glamp sites and with farmlands, to kind of make it different to how it was 50 years ago, and to open it up to people. And the curiosity of adventuring on someone else's land from a very kind of voyeuristic point of view was also really
Yes.
interesting to me. But going back to the psychological side of it, I think I, like you, have always wanted to kind of get the hell out of here, and to have a get the hell out of here type opportunity I think I've done a lot of work on my own. There's something that was introduced to me about 3 years ago by someone in my community, Better, Bolder, Braver, called the Enneagram. I don't know if you've ever heard of the
Oh,
Enneagram.
I have, yes. Enneagram.
Yeah. And
Yes,
I'm not
yes.
in any way religious. And if anything, I was born Jewish, but this is something that I think Christians have embraced over the years. But I just want to caveat again that I've got no interest in religion per se, but it's a very interesting ancient psychometric testing modeling system. And it turns out I'm an Enneagram 7. And in fact, I have a cushion with all the highlights of what an Enneagram 7 are. And I just want to hold it up to you, Alastair. I want to see if any of them resonate with you. I'm not doing a
Yeah.
psychotherapy analysis on you or anything like that, but I'm just quite
Oh, I'm
interested.
intrigued. I'll
Just
show
because
you. I'll show you a cushion as well.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. We're back. Do you want to hold your cushion up first, or do you
Yeah.
want me
So I got in a large box through the post filled with flower petals a cushion of my own face,
Okay, that's
which I found
weird. Lovely.
absolutely hilarious. It was from
Who sent you that?
somebody in Saudi Arabia who'd seen I made a film about crossing the empty quarter desert, and they'd seen it and enjoyed it, and they've put on
Oh
there,
my
see the
God.
opportunities for adventures, not the constraints that get in the way. A nice frilly cushion with a brilliant large photo of myself in it, which I love.
That is, I don't really, I'm not often stuck for words, but yeah, I'm just going to take a moment to digest that.
And now you can show me your cushion.
I'm going to show you my cushion and then I'll read it out. So
Oh, that's a very nice design.
cool, isn't it? So this is the ingredients of an Enneagram 7
Yeah.
person. At the top, it says recipe for the Enneagram 7. I'm going to have to read it. So every minute possible, best if not limited to a time frame. So it's every minute possible over prep time, and best if not limited to a time frame over total time. That I'm not clear about. And then you've got the ingredients here, which is what I think makes us both up: optimism, spontaneity, FOMO, joy, curiosity, trial and error. I've got it on this side as well: resilience, anticipation, exhilaration. Brash nerviness can be substituted with sass or spunk. And notes: may become irritable and tense when under high heat.
That's great. I'm gonna have to do some Googling of these because it's not what I thought it was when you said them. So that sounds really interesting.
So it's I'm not going to go really deep onto it now, but I will send you some stuff, because the idea is that there's 27 types of people in the world, that can be divided into 9 types, and within those are 3 subtypes. And essentially, the Enneagram is about understanding how we have reacted to pain and trauma in our life. And we've all reacted in different ways in order to move forward. And it helps you to understand who you are and who you're like, and where you go when you're in stress and where you go when you're not in stress, which is really helpful because firstly, you don't feel alone. And then you read people's stuff and you're like, I think you're a 7, and you're not allowed to tiger type. That's really not appropriate. But when I read your stuff, I can't help it. I just think there's so much about this that feels familiar. Hence mentioning the need to escapism, and being so bold as to ask you questions about your kind of psychological makeup. I don't do that very often, but I'm just so curious.
Have you done that? Is it the Myers-Briggs or something when you get the 4 letters of yourself?
Yes, I'm an ENTJ or an ENFJ.
Ah,
What are you?
I can never remember, but I can never remember the 4.
Well, I'm not that into psychometric testing, and in fact, I was put in the center of a room in a big insurance company that I was working for once, and everyone else was told that I was the most extrovert person in the company, and I'd been there
Oh,
one
wow.
week, and I was very young, and from then on I was known as Frances the extrovert, and I was
Oh,
like, oh
gosh.
my God. So I don't love how it labels people,
Ah,
Myers-Briggs and some other ones. And what I like
yeah.
about the Enneagram is it is quite fluid. You go from one
Okay.
type to another depending on what's going on for you.
Oh,
a bit.
okay. It's not just, you're not fixed for life.
No, and you can have aspirations to
Ah.
move, for example, as a 7 into 5, which is where I start to not want to talk to everyone all day and surround myself with books.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
nice.
and or in stress, I go to 1, which is kind of very fastidious, much more binary in my thinking about right and wrong. So depending on whether I'm in a place of stress or a place of sort of more chill, you move around and become a bit more type 5 or a bit more type 1. But anyway, I've taken up way too much time talking about that now. I'll send you some things. But I just want to loop back to the point I was hoping to make, which is around mobilizing people who are in a position of privilege, who are frustrated and want to get off their asses and do something in the world, but don't want to feel overwhelmed by the amount of stuff there is now to do. And for people like us to be able to help other people to shift the dial just a tiny bit, knowing that that's great, and you don't need to save the whole world or be Greta necessarily. And that was kind of the point I was trying to make. And also for those people to then capitalize on the opportunity, as I think you and I have, and do the self-growth work at the same time, and kind of repurpose the good and grow as a person, or the other way around, which is to grow as a person, but then to repurpose that in a meaningful way for society.
I'd imagine that I sort of see those as being more of a, not a one then the other, more of a sort of circular positive feedback loop, haven't you? Yeah, it's very hard, isn't it, to choose what to focus your times, efforts, and passions on. But I think trying to remember that you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything is really helpful in terms of you have to sort of pick a battle and go for it. And one thing that I'm mulling over now, I've finished this book, Local, is there's loads and loads of different issues in that book, but spread necessarily very thin, just a few pages on all sorts of things. And what I've been mulling over now is which of those do I care about the most, and also which of those do my skills and possible USPs lend themselves towards to pouring my efforts into and going a bit deeper on one or two of those themes rather than just spreading so thin. So yeah, I'm trying to mull over that at the moment, which way to go.
Right. And that's kind of how you and I met, I think, because you were one of the things I love about your work. And by the way, please, I mean, if you go onto Alastair's website, or if you write Alastair an email, I shouldn't get everyone to tell you to write emails to you, but Alastair lists off all the places you can hang out with him at, and you've got his newsletter, his podcast, his website, you can read his books, and he has a lovely blog, and a Patreon page as well if you want to support him that way. And also a YouTube channel, and as I say, is on Instagram. You're less on LinkedIn, aren't you? I don't see you hanging out there
I'm on
that much.
LinkedIn, but that's just automatic posting of stuff from elsewhere. And
Yeah,
similarly for Facebook, that's a repurposing of content from elsewhere. I just
right.
have a limited amount of time for all
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah,
things.
of
So it's
course.
mostly Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, and the newsletters. I really enjoy doing newsletters.
And you, in one of them, very honestly, so with great authenticity and vulnerability, which is, marks of good ethical marketing, I would say, um, shared that with us, that you weren't sure what you wanted to do next. So mindful of time, I wonder if we can just spend the last 10 minutes of this conversation talking about what you might do next. And yeah, you asked the question, what do you think I should do next? And it was great. And you gave us
Yes.
a chance to be part of, you gamified your own, you not only gamified it for yourself, but you almost invited your audience to be part of this gamification of your adventures. And
Mm.
then on top of that, brilliant, you summarized it in this wonderful series of pie charts and other bits and bobs that summarized everybody's view on what you should do next. I loved
Yes,
it.
which inevitably ends up with 60% telling you to do one thing and the other 60% telling you to do directly the opposite thing,
So
and
what are you
20%
gonna,
telling
yeah, what
you
are you
to
thinking?
um what am I thinking? So I mean, I have been going round and round. So for the last 20 odd years, I've always known exactly what I'm going to do next. I'm just desperate to charge on with the next thing. So I've always been just charge with ideas coming up my ears. So it's quite an unusual situation for the last few months of mulling this over. But I think what I'm thinking is that um, it feels like an important duty. If you don't have any other important duty to do in life, then it seems like the important duty is to fix the planet. And that applies to most people in most careers, unless they've got some other important duty to fix, like cancer or something like that. But it feels like, wow, this is the thing that really needs fixing in the world, and it's probably the thing I'm in the best position to try and do in it. So how do I do that? Do I commit to one aspect that feels relevant to me, whether that's getting people access to the land and therefore more connected with it, and therefore behaving in ways that are going to save the do more to protect the planet, or is it about promoting rewilding, because that's fantastic for nature and for decarbonisation, blah blah. So there are all these different single issues that I could dive into, or do I focus on the stuff that I've generally been doing for quite a while, which essentially is enthusing people in a generalist sort of way to be curious and excited about nature, adventure, the outdoors, and therefore by getting more people outdoors and into nature, those people themselves might become galvanized to make some change happen. So that's roughly where I am. Is do I go down a specific issue, or do I just try and get loads of people to do loads of stuff and then they can figure out the bits that matter to them?
So you've done a lovely talk, which you can get on YouTube, everybody, for Do Lectures. Just to let everyone know who's listening, the talk is called what is it called? Living Adventurously is that what it's called, Alastair?
Yeah, I think it's something to do with living adventurously at the Do Lectures. I did another, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I did one years ago about the importance of jumping in rivers, but that was an older version.
Yeah, no, the one at the Do Lectures, which you now promote on the website, is the one Living Adventurously. I'm just going to triple check that. Yeah, Living Adventurously, everyone on YouTube. It's great. And it's at Do Lectures. I'm wondering if you have come across the Do Lectures concept of a manifesto. The manifesto.
I know the Do Lectures manifesto. I hadn't thought of that in terms of myself. That's interesting.
Okay, so maybe when you and I chat offline, another thing I'm going to share with you. I went to their I learned about the Do Lectures manifesto about 3 years ago and created one for Better Bolder Braver, but I recently spent a day with the Do Lectures at their manifesto workshop, which was really interesting. But the way that I've interpreted it is what I now refer to for my clients as a bigger picture system change manifesto. And I find it really helps people to get really clear on if they are seeking a bigger picture system change or not. And if they're not, that's okay. If they, for example, are coaches who just want to help an individual move forward in their life, that's fine. But if they want to die feeling that they have created a bigger picture system change, then everything that they do, is my invitation, should speak to this manifesto. And it's a really great way for them to make decisions about what they do moving forward. So what might you say on the spot is your kind of, I don't think it's just, there's no question of a doubt that you have a bigger picture system change manifesto. I'm not sure what it says right now, but do you have a sense of what it says? Do you have a sense of what the headline is?
Yeah, so I certainly would have had a strong sense up until publishing local, which would have been along the lines of encouraging people to live a little bit more adventurously every day. So, and that's an evolution in terms of what does adventure mean from my original sort of definition through then playing the violin. I spent a month walking through Spain with no money, playing a violin extremely badly, which helped me really redefine adventure as being about chasing vulnerability and just daring yourself to be vulnerable and take emotional risks. So that's the sort of evolution of adventure and living adventure every day. So that would be very, very much my sort of strapline key manifesto thing. I think the since writing local, which is to my surprise, became a book that was more about almost more of a sort of nature activism kind of book than I'd ever written before, and that I'd ever anticipated writing before. I think I need now to try and work out how I add that saving the world aspect into the living adventurously every day part of things.
And what's so and by the way, everybody, the film of Alastair traveling around Spain with the violin is hilarious and amazing. Please also try and find
Yeah.
YouTube.
That's
It's
called My
so
Midsummer Morning.
it's only about 20 minutes long or something, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful film. I think, I knew this was going to go so fast, this conversation. I suppose in summary, what's wonderful is that you already have brought the two together without really realizing it. And that must be both exciting and also overwhelming, because you are now in this privileged position of being so loved as somebody who has brought adventure and doing good together. And probably why I really like your work, because you give people permission to do what's right for them, but at the same time do what's right for the planet, and not kind of be cutting off their nose to spite their face. And so I suppose anything that you do decide to do, and it's a great privilege to be in touch with you. I'd really look forward to seeing what that is, if not actively be involved in it. I feel could so quickly have such incredibly profound effects on individuals and workplaces. And I just wonder how long you're going to be comfortable sitting around before having to get up and commit yourself to a thing, because of course that's your work as well, isn't it? It's just to sit in the unknown for a bit.
Yeah. Well, generally, the way I work out what I'm going to do is just by piling into the very first thing that pours into my head and launch into that. And then in a week, I'm either still doing it or I'm bored and I've moved on to another thing. So I tend to just figure things out by doing. And what's really nice about my approach to social media and newsletters and things, you sort of mentioned, is that I'm quite sort of honest and open on it. So I'm quite happy to say on, say, Instagram, wow, I've had this amazing new idea. I'm going to do this. And then a week later go, whoa, that idea sucked. Do you agree it sucked? What should I do instead? And then you can take that feedback, and there's no sort of grand master plan. And I'm quite open about that, and people respond to that. So I think the way I will figure out is through doing stuff, and then I'll hopefully settle on what feels like the next direction.
I love that so much. Thank you. And I also very much believe that it allows people to do more when they know they're not going to get told off, or there aren't going to be terrible ramifications for if they have to pivot or iterate, or even stop and say, do you know what, that wasn't great, was it? Let's start again. What's the
Yes.
story?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
kind of be able to be honest about the shadow side,
Mm.
as we say about stories, and say that made sense then, but not sure it does now, or I can see that has informed some interesting choices on my part, on the company's part, or whatever these people might be sitting on.
Yeah.
So
I think allowing yourself to change your mind is such a rare but powerful thing to do, to think, I really believe this thing, and oh, now I don't. Now I've moved on to this. And so to be allowed to change and pivot, I think is a really helpful thing to do. And I try and allow myself to think, not just because I've always done it this way, that I must continue to always do it that way.
completely. And for people listening who've got kids and wives or husbands, I haven't even touched on how your poor wife deals with you changing direction or anything like that in this podcast, or my husband indeed. But also it's a metaphor for bringing up children. One of the stories in Microadventures is to take the train to somewhere and stop, and then cycle home. So obviously it's not a London Underground train, but an overground train. And not to use a sat nav if at all possible, but rather to use a compass, or there's an app that you recommend. And the idea of giving children in life, as a metaphor, the sense of choice and just following your nose and making a decision, independence. I mean, so much about Alastair's work is so beautiful on a metaphorical level for being a parent, I think, as well. So I think that, and of course you write children's books already that are so powerful. So whoever you are listening to this, there's a reason why you should be investing time and energy in adventuring through Alastair's thing. So I really hope this has been a good sort of springboard for you to know about Alastair's work if you don't already, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Alastair, have you got any final thoughts on this conversation that went far too fast for me?
Interesting, and ranging through cushions and all sorts. So yeah, thank you for prompting some thoughts. I do like that idea of thinking of the big festo, and once you've got that in place, all the other bits then fall into place somewhat. So building it from the top down. So yeah, that's given me some good food for thought. So thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Alistair. And thanks everyone so much for listening. I shall see you next time.